I'm Cat Oriel, a reporter with Forbes Breaking News. Today I'm here with Jeannette Pai-Espinosa, the president of Justice and Joy National Collaborative, among many other titles. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kat, for having me.
Yes, so first I wanted to talk about the election on Tuesday. There were massive wins for Democrats in many different categories, but also more particularly about abortion in Ohio. So in Ohio, they approved a ballot measure to amend the state constitution to establish a right to abortion. So I would like to know from you, what happens next in Ohio? What does it mean for abortion in the state? Is it forever off the table, or could they go back and amend the state constitution again in the future?
They could actually go back and attempt to amend the Constitution through a referendum. I think it's unlikely that it would pass, but there's always that possibility. And I think folks will be preparing on the ground for that inevitability.
Were you surprised by the decision of voters and the results from Tuesday?
I'm always surprised. I grew up in Kansas, and Kansas surprised us earlier on. But because I work with girls and young women and gender expansive young people, and hear a lot of the conversation around the right to choose, around bodily autonomy, I was not surprised that they came out in force. So in that sense, I'm not surprised.
So what do you think the vote in Ohio and previous states that have made grounds when it comes to abortion rights, what does that mean for abortion rights federally? Do you think that there's any chance there could be more federal protections in a post-Roe world?
Wow, that's a great question, Kat. I would like to believe that there is. I think if I look at Congress as it's currently the current sort of construction makeup of Congress, I am doubtful. Perhaps after 2024, there'll be more of a window for that to happen. I know it's high on the priority list of everyone that I work with and talk to around the country.
I do want to dig more into what you've been seeing in this, post-Dobbs, post-Roe America. How have you found that abortion rights are affecting voters, and particularly in your research with women of color?
Yeah, I think it really is. We released earlier this year, a report that was based on conversations we had with young people between the ages of 14 and 24, primarily young people of color, girls and gender expansive young people, about the impact of the Dobbs decision on them. And what we heard was pretty astounding. It is well beyond just a question of choice and the right to reproductive and gender affirming care. It really, for them, is about liberation. It's about control. It's about autonomy. And so I think that's at a different level than just looking at it as a single issue around choice. Not that that's not pivotal and that's not critical, but that's not what's moving them into action. And actually what they said was, they are channeling their rage about all these things into action.
So what do those actions look like? Is it in, the voting booth, just them getting out and voting for pro-choice leaders? Or is it protests? What actions are you seeing from young women of color?
I think it's all of that. I think it is even looking towards the future to be the folks that replace folks in Congress, to govern in a way that is just and equitable. So I think it is the protests, it's on the ground activism, it's connecting with each other around the country. That's a lot of what we do, connect folks around the country. But I think it is not a short term. It's not a moment in time for them. It's the future of their lives. And I think that is a different perspective than, for example, I turned 16 just a few weeks before Roe passed. And I think that they come into it with a different sense of something lost that has to be regained, which was different than I was younger. And so I feel like sort of intergenerationally, choice and reproductive rights are going to be top of the list for a long time across generations.
Well, would you say that abortion is the number one priority for women of color, or, high on the list? What other factors do you think, in talking to young people, what else are they concerned about besides abortion and reproductive rights?
They're concerned about safety. Everything from gender-based violence to police brutality to anything you can think of. They're concerned about their safety. And I think what I saw through the conversations we had was that the Dobbs decision was sort of a line in the sand, if you will, because it is the most personal violation of those things that they fear most deeply around safety and control and autonomy and justice and power.
Also, in your research, do you notice a difference between women of color and white women when it comes to this issue, or do you feel like white women are also feeling a call to action, also showing up and, have abortion and access to abortion as their number one issue? Like, how does race play a factor in this?
Well, most of our work is with young women of color, but if we look at some of the data from the election, I think it's pretty clear that white women, in some categories, it is a number one issue. In some sort of demographic breakdowns, it's not. I think I'm going to hazard a guess, since I'm not a white woman, that abortion is a very important issue for white women that stands alone as an issue. Whereas, as I was saying earlier, I think for women, young women and women of color and gender expansive folks, it is a marker of something much deeper. It is a symptom of the root causes of injustice.
And then
So
also,
it's a heart and soul, right? Not just a political issue.
and then also in your research, have you talked to men and young men and white
We
men,
have not.
men of color? No, you haven't. So
We have not. What I saw in some of the data about the election was, though, that a much higher percentage of young women voted Democrat across abortion, as well as for electoral positions, higher than white women, higher than young men, and higher than white men voted Democrat. So I think that's a little bit of an indicator. Young women haven't typically been in on anyone's priority list when it comes to civic engagement and politics, frankly.
So you think Democrats should continue this and, champion abortion rights as a main issue because it's resonating with young voters, young women of color?
I do. And I think if they want to reach younger voters and younger voters of color and hold on to them, they need to not only look at abortion, but look at what are some of the root causes of the disparity of what happens when we don't have the right to choose.
And how does fundraising play a role in this? Like, are there NGOs and organizations like Planned Parenthood that you see supporting the Democrats in order to mobilize these voters? How are Democrats fundraising on this issue as well?
I think people are just starting really to pay attention to Gen Z young folks, to be quite honest. I hear a lot of things out in the community about we gotta get going with them, and we're going to be working to activate young girls, gender expansive young folks, particularly those who have been system impacted and face a lot of chronic adversity, because they don't even show up in the numbers that we're looking at now. So I think it's coming, but I think it's coming and it's picking up rapidly because we're looking at 2024.
So do you have any other advice for Democrats of what they should be doing as they're looking toward 2024? Like, what other actions would you like to see President Biden take, or on the state level as well, when it comes to protecting abortion rights?
I think there's a fair amount of buzz out there that younger voters really are. They're not necessarily voting along party lines. It's issue specific. And I guess the advice I would give to the Democratic Party is, yes, it is issue specific, but what are the underlying values of those issues? And what are the underlying values that will guide the reactions to whatever comes up, whether it's a constitutional challenge or state level challenge? I think that's what young folks are really driven by, a set of core values that they see reflected in issues. It's not just the issue alone. It's not that simple.
Well, in our last few minutes together, I do want to touch base about your background, because when I was reading about it, it's very interesting, and you touched on it a little bit about intergenerational activism. So I want to know, how did you get started in this field, and how are you passing it on to future generations?
Sure. Well, I'm my ancestry is Korean, so my parents came here shortly after the war, and they were very involved in civil rights, having come from a country that was fighting for its own democracy. And so I really grew up in the 60s and 70s of parents that really, it was a priority for us to soak in those things. Went to college around the time of Roe and affirmative action and women's studies. And I was an organizer on campus working on the same issues that I work on today. And my husband is an activist. My daughter works for Planned Parenthood Federation. So we are definitely a family that is committed to changing the world.
Yeah. Well, where do you feel like that openness came from? Because I feel like sometimes with immigrant families, it's especially Asian immigrant families, it's more like keep your head down, don't like stir the pot. Like, where did your parents, how were they like, let's fight? And like, did you ever have fear of just being like, no, we just gotta like stick to the status quo? Like, where did that inspiration come from?
I don't know. My family history in Korea was somewhat revolutionary also. So I think it was to some degree inbred. I think what they didn't account for is the independence. I remember my dad saying once, I think I raised my oldest daughter to be too independent. So I may have crossed a little line that they weren't really intending for us to go there, but I think it was, I think it's just been part of our family for many, many generations, quite frankly.
Yeah. And then, so what other final message do you have for women of color, people of color who might not have that same sort of empowerment? Like, what should they do to, fight for these issues, especially reproductive justice, and other issues that they might care about?
I think really, it's a time to step out and step up because I think the consequences of not are really significant. We've already seen that. We've lost so much just in the last year of rights that I thought we would always have. And I would say join together. I think it's about collective impact, collective power, not standing alone. You're not alone. And if we can surround ourselves with each other and not fight against each other, I think that the future is bright. But it is an uphill battle. I can't really, it's unimaginable to me that we sit where we are in the span of my lifetime. I can't quite believe it. But I see a lot of hope. And I think a lot of the hope is to work intergenerationally. Let's link arms across generation. And I think then we're a wall that can't be bridged, frankly, or broken.
Thank you so much for your time today, Jeannette.
Thank you.